Sulu is a province of the Philippines in the Sulu archipelago and part of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. Its capital is Jolo on the island of the same name. Maimbing, the royal capital of the Sultanate of Sulu, is also located in the province. Sulu is along the southern border of the Sulu Sea and the northern boundary of the Celebes Sea. Prior to the arrival of Islam in Sulu, the province used to adhere to local animist religions. This later changed to Hindu and Buddhist belief systems throughout this time. The kingdom of Lupa Sug had been established centuries before Islam arrived. The advent of Islam around 1138 through merchants and traders had a distinct influence on Southeast Asia. The coming of Arabs, Persians and other Muslims paved the way for the arrival of religious missionaries, traders, scholars and travelers to Sulu and Mindanao in the 12th century. A landmark born of the social process was the founding of the Sultanate of Sulu. Year 1380 CE. Karim al-Makdum came to Sulu and introduced Islam to the Philippines. Year 1450 CE. A Johor-born Arab adventurer, Sayyid Abubakar Abaran, came to Sulu and lived with Raja Baguinda Ali, eventually marrying his daughter Dayang Dayang Paramasuli and eventually inheriting Raja Baguinda's polity and turning it into a sultanate. Sayyid Abubakar eventually inherited the rule of Raja Baguinda, established the Sultanate of Sulu and became its first sultan. To consolidate his rule, Sayyid Abubakar united the local political units under the umbrella of the Sultanate. He brought Sulu, Zamboanga Peninsula, Palawan and Basilan under its aegis. The navigational error that landed Ferdinand Magellan in Limasawa brought awareness of Europe to the Philippines and opened the door to Spanish colonial incursion. The Spaniards introduced Catholicism and a political system of church-state dichotomy, which encountered fierce resistance in the devastating Mora Wars from 1578 to 1899. The Sultanate of Sulu formally recognized Spanish sovereignty in Tawi-Tawi and Sulu in middle of 19th century, but these areas remained partially ruled by the Spanish as their sovereignty was limited to military stations and garrisons and pockets of civilian settlements, until they had to abandon the region as a consequence of their defeat in the Spanish-American War. After Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States, American forces came to Jolo and ended the 23 years of Spanish military occupation. On August 20, Sultan Jamalul Kiram II and Brig. General John C. Bates signed the Bates Agreement that continued the gradual emasculation of the Sultanate started by Spain until March 1915, when the Sultan abdicated his temporal powers in the Carpenter Agreement. The agreement eliminated opposition to the civilian government of Gov. Clinton Solidum. The Department of Mindanao and Sulu under Gov. Carpenter was created by Philippine Commission Act 2309 and ended on February 5, 1920 by Act of Philippine Legislature No. 2878. The Bureau of Non-Christian Tribes was organized and briefly headed by Teofisto Gangona Sr. With the enactment by the U.S. Congress of the Jones Law in 1916, ultimate Philippine independence was guaranteed and the Filipinization of public administration began. Sulu, however, had an appointed American governor until 1935, and the Governor-General in Manila had a say in Sulu affairs. At any rate, the essence of local governance forged by Raja Baguinda continued to permeate the ethos of Sulu politics despite centuries of colonial presence. History points to a local government in Sulu that antedates other similar systems in the country. The province hosted the Daru Jambangan, which was the royal palace of the Sultan of Sulu since historical times. The palace, located in Maimbing, was made of wood and was destroyed in 1932 by a huge storm. During the brief Japanese occupation years, Sulu was bombed by the Japanese and was conquered afterwards. The Japanese were eventually expelled by the Americans and the natives of Sulu, and the Americans started to push for the independence of the Philippines as one country. This prompted various leaders from Mindanao and the Sulu archipelago to campaign against being lumped with the Catholic natives of Luzon and the Visayas. Despite the campaign against the One Philippines model, the United States granted independence to the Philippines, effectively giving control of Mindanao and the Sulu archipelago to the Filipino government in Manila. At the beginning of Philippine independence era, the reconstruction of the Daru Jambangan continued to be of huge importance to the people of Sulu, as only a few arches and posts remained from the once grand palace complex. Many members of the royal family advocated for the reconstruction of the palace. However, the government of the Philippines made no official position or fund for the matter. During that time, the Mindanao sentiment to become a free country on its own was also felt in Sulu. In